Well, welcome to another How Conversation on Moral Leadership. I'm Dana Bourne, and I am a Senior Distinguished Fellow for How. And today we are so blessed to have with us Deborah Borda, who is the Executive Advisor to the New York Philharmonic. She's a partner and friend and a wave maker in moral leadership with the How Institute for Society. So welcome, Deborah Borda. We look forward to this conversation with you.
Hi, Dana. Great to be here and to see you again and to keep the embers of our friendship burning.
Well, welcome. And it is a true privilege to welcome Deborah Borda, who's a leader who has not only shaped the world of music, but also exemplifies the very essence of moral leadership. Deborah Borda's life journey is exemplifying, elevating, and inspiring. She has a passion that has since propelled her remarkable career, leading some of the most prestigious orchestras, from the Detroit Symphony to San Francisco Symphony, St. Paul's Chamber Orchestra, and of course the Los Angeles and New York Philharmonics. Her leadership is not just about music. It's about people, purpose, and possibility. And Deborah Borda has redefined what it means to lead in the arts, from champion innovation to mentoring the next generation of musicians and leaders. And I had the opportunity to meet her in 2015 when she brought her expertise to the Harvard Kennedy School Center for Public Leadership as an arts executive, our first ever and Hauser leader in residence at the Kennedy School. So let's start with you and your beginning, because I know with our listeners who are also leaders and growing alongside of us here in this journey, you grew up in New York and attended your first Philharmonic concert when you were only 4 years old. Was it that particular moment, or was there someone early on in your life that inspired you to take this path that has become sort of your why in your life?
Well, not a someone, but actually the first was a something, which was my mother always had the radio on. And in New York, the classical music station, which is a great station, was called WQXR. And she always had it on. And I just loved it. And I made her get me, I asked her to get me, she got me, remember we had those little round 45s, I guess they're called. And she got me a recording of Eine kleine Nachmusik, and I wore it out. And so she thought, well, Deborah's interested. So she took me to a concert and we went to Carnegie Hall. And I'm not real tall, but at any rate, we sat at the very top. And I remember climbing up the stairs to Carnegie Hall. It was as if I was climbing a ladder. I was so little. And then we were so far away. The orchestra looked about that big. So I remember asking my mother, are these real or is this a toy orchestra? But then they started to play and the sound was like that. Leonard Bernstein was conducting. I went back and looked it up later on from the date. And I loved it. I feel like I almost always loved it. And then when I went to school, I thought, well, I'm going to play an instrument. And so we lined up to get our instruments. And I wanted to have the flute because it was small and easy to carry. So by the time I got there were two instruments left, a French horn and a violin. Well, that was an easy decision. I took the lighter one, and that was it. That was how I came to love music. You know, playing in an orchestra, which I did, it's like a team sport. I didn't play sports because I was a music nerd, but it was like our team, and you do have to function as a team.
I have a question for you, if you don't mind, going into the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra, where you were, the musical director at the time, saying, I guess a woman couldn't do the job, and your offer was rescinded.
It's a terrible story, and I feel free to tell it because, and I will name the person, he has passed away, and he was very famous. It was Lorin Maazel, one of the most famous conductors in the world, and at the time, Pittsburgh Orchestra is one of our great American orchestras. And they recruited me and I flew to Pittsburgh, and I thought it was a very nice city. I met with the board members, I met with the orchestra. It was great. It was going to be a fantastic partnership. And it was a big step up because at that point I would have been the first woman to run one of the Big Ten orchestras. So they said, this is just great. We're so excited. We need you to fly to London to meet Maestro Maazel. So I go, great, okay. And I remember I stayed at the Savoy Hotel just to meet him in the River Room at 4 o'clock on such and such a date. I get all ready and, I go down. In those days, you only wore dresses, I'll tell you. And I went down and I sat there at 4 o'clock, 4:15, 4:30, 4:45, 5 o'clock. Okay, maybe it was off by an hour. 5:15, 5:30. I got up and I went upstairs and I called the chairman of the board, this wonderful guy, Ben O'Byrne, and I said, something really went wrong. I don't get it. And he said, let me call you back. So he called me back later and he said, tomorrow morning or afternoon at this time, go to this address in London and he'll meet you there. So we get there. It was like no place. And I thought, oh, they gave me the wrong address. And then suddenly a door opened and a cellist came out with a cello case. So I said, aha. So I rushed in and Mazel was rehearsing. And I go up to him afterwards and he said, oh, come upstairs to my studio. And I remember we got there and he sat down and he took out a box and he said, I'm going to have a cigar. Would you care for one? So I, no, thank you. So he said, tell me about yourself. So, I told him, I tried to tell him very concisely and also to compliment him, such a great maestro, because you've always got to do that with the old time maestri. And after 4 or 5 minutes, he said, that's a wonderful story. Thank you so much. And you're going to have a wonderful career. I know it. Thank you. Goodbye. So I went back to the hotel and I called Chairman Benno Berndt and I said, this is not going to work. He goes, I already heard. It's not going to work anyway. It's not you, it's him. I said, it's me too. So that was it. And it was, to have had a job offered to you, to be flown to London, to, finalize the deal. But it really hurt.
So what advice would you give to those facing roadblocks in their careers, especially one that feels like it's beyond your control?
Well, they often are. 2 pieces of advice. Key one, take another road, go another path. There are almost always alternatives. So that's one, just take another way. And the other thing is, I know it almost sounds banal, this word, because we use it so much now to talk about kids and people. But if you're going to have an important job, you have to have resilience. I hesitate to use that word, but in fact, it's a really good word. It means something. And so it was difficult for me to get my first presidency of an orchestra. And I had to go, my first big job as president and CEO, I had to go to a smaller orchestra. But I thought, okay, it's a wonderful orchestra. It was the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. I will go and I will do this because I believe in it artistically, and then I can prove myself. So it's take another road. There's a roadblock. If you're driving, you figure out another way to go.
Throughout your career, you've been at the helm of a lot of the world's most prestigious arts organizations. How do you define moral leadership, and how has it shaped the approach that you have to leading the world in music and beyond music?
Moral leadership it's really 2 key components. And the first one is simple: honesty. It requires honesty, supreme honesty with yourself, but honesty with others. And that is the core to me. And what that relates to is knowing, and this is again relating to your being the primary adjudicator of this, which is knowing what you feel is acceptable behavior and acceptable standards. This is very important. Now, in saying that, there is another aspect that as I got older, I started to think about, and honestly, at the beginning of my career, I don't think I was good at it. There are a couple of things I wasn't good at, but just kindness, kindness, and 2 kinds of kindness again. And it starts with kindness to yourself. Don't always beat yourself up about everything, because those of us who are high achievers are hoping to be, we do that. But the other is, if you can do that, you can start to extend that kindness to others.
Deborah, we're so grateful you joined us for the House Summit in New York City in December of 2024. And you shared a wonderful story on the panel about extending trust and loyalty to your orchestra while you were searching for a new musical director for the LA Philharmonic. You were dedicated to not just making a decision, but also including the orchestra members in that decision to get excited about it. Maybe you could share with us the example of the situation and how you brought them into that decision making inclusively, and also how you, in a sense, broke down the old bureaucratic and hierarchical kind of decision making that was of the past to be more of a shared decision making for the future.
I was at the LA Philharmonic for 17 years. At a certain point, the 12th year or something, and it was couldn't have been going better, but I wasn't happy. I was felt like somehow I'm not something's not satisfying me in this job. And I realized actually, and I started to come to it, and then it really gelled for me when I was a Hauser Fellow, that I was very used to an old-fashioned way of managing, because my wonderful mentor, who's one of my best friends today, who'd been the president of the San Francisco Symphony, and this is a long time ago. So in those days, we had very top-down management. So his name is Peter Pastreich, wonderful man, still lives in San Francisco. And so we would have our senior vice presidents, and we'd meet once a week, and we would bring the problems to him, and he would give us an answer. And it was sort of okay. And I mean, yes, we learned. He was a wonderful teacher because he would ask you questions. So, I mean, I learned everything from him, but I was used to this, and I was trying to manage in the same way, but times had changed and I had changed. So we were running a music director search, and that's always a big, big deal at an orchestra, especially at a big famous orchestra. And 2 years before that, I had seen the most remarkable talent I had ever seen. His name was Gustavo Dudamel. He was 23 years old, and he had just won the International Mahler competition. And we brought him, the first day I tried to book him, he didn't have a manager. The second day he had 3 or 4. And so we brought him back a couple of times, because one of the things I made a promise to the orchestra about is I would never hire a conductor, and especially a music director, unless they felt good about it. They had to agree, because this guy stands, a woman now, stands in front of them for weeks on end, and there has to be a synergy. So I said, okay, I have an idea. I think you should go see him. He's conducting in Rome this week. We will fly the committee over and meet with him, have dinner with him, spend some time with him, go to his rehearsal, and then come back and tell me what you think. They said, well, aren't you going with us? And I said, no, I will not go with you. I need you to go and help me with this decision. Please come back and tell me what you think. I trust you. Now that was like, and when I told my colleagues, they said, you didn't go, we can't believe it. I go, no, they came back, they said, yeah, he's the man.
You've led organizations through a lot of rough seas. And as we know, and Dov Seidman, our founder and chair, often says, it's not the smooth seas that make the sailor, it's the rough seas. You've led through some tough, rough seas like COVID, a lot of financial crises. And we all know that leadership is requiring of us to lead and guide others through these difficult times. Share with us a moment when you elevated and inspired your team during a significant challenge, and maybe made these challenges into opportunities.
Well, of course, I think this is the 5th anniversary today as we speak of COVID and the American and world shutdown. So I talked to my colleagues at the Metropolitan Opera and Carnegie Hall, and we decided it just wasn't safe. We had to shut down. So we called the mayor of New York at that time, de Blasio, and he said, no, you have to keep going. This is this. And we said, we are going to announce tomorrow at noon that we are ceasing operations till we know what's happening. And so guiding people through a couple of really difficult things. The first was, calming the orchestra and putting them on temporary leave. And the next thing was figuring out how to get the entire office onto Zoom so that we could all work remotely. And they didn't want to come in. I mean, everybody was scared out of their minds. But for the orchestra, something else happened, which was the 106 members of the New York Philharmonic are our family. They're the core of what we do. And so I went to the board and I said, we cannot stop paying them. We have to continue their health care. And the board, they were wonderful. The board, I said, this is our family, this is our product also. So they agreed, but then what I had to do was, because we just couldn't continue it at the full salaries, I had to, first of all, lay off a number of staff members, all the production staff members, and that was really difficult, although the government was very positive and did help them out. But then I negotiated a new contract by Zoom with the orchestra. And that was, they were great, but it was a very difficult moment. So people, about a couple of major things happened. One was that we were about to renovate David Geffen Hall, which had been 40 years in the making. And so working with my partner, Henry Timms, who was the president and CEO of Lincoln Center, we set upon an audacious plan, which was that since we were going to be closed down, and we figured we would be closed down for a year and a half, it was middle of the year, we knew the next, we would try to do an accelerated process and open the hall quickly. But that meant we had to raise $450 million. And we did, and we did it by Zoom. So that was, people felt positive. We saw, this is, the veritable lemonade out of lemons. But then there were other things. The orchestra became they were very, their life is playing and coming together. So two things. They themselves, we encouraged them to think of a special project. The entire orchestra came together on Zoom and played Bolero. And it was an amazing performance. We had millions of downloads. But then as the summer came, it was difficult. And so we had an idea, which was we would start something called Bandwagon. And we would get a big truck and paint it bright colors. And we would drive around the city with musicians, and we could amplify it and do pop-up concerts all over. Well, people started signing up like that. It was great. We did in the 5 boroughs close to 100 concerts all over. And they were very moving, because I remember we were in one really tricky area of Brooklyn, and we pulled up and they started to play, and people were laughing and making fun of somebody. And then they got quiet. And then I noticed two things. When they did a waltz, people started to dance with each other. But in the more sadder music, I noticed a man crying. And I just, it gave us all so much hope. And it was a very special time, a sad time, but a time where we saw hope, and we brought hope and the beauty of music and that flame of humanity to people, even people who thought, oh, they loved it.
Thank you for sharing that with us. It's elevating just to hear this story as you think back and knowing how tough those times were, but looking back and celebrating. You also have led some very diverse groups. If we could talk about that a little bit. I mean, diversity in many ways, but musicians, administrators, audiences, communities. How do you foster a culture in these deep values in every individual?
I think partly by believing in it and being able to speak about it. But let me give you an example. So in honor, this is at the New York Philharmonic, of the 19th, the signing of the 19th Amendment, which gave white women the right to vote finally, way after even the UK did it. We launched a project called Project 19, and it was commissioning 19 women to write major world premieres for the New York Philharmonic. And they did so. And it's Project 32, because we keep going, because there's so many wonderful women conductors. But our very first composer that we commissioned is a woman named Tanya Leon. She had left Cuba when she was 19, an amazing, amazing woman. And she wrote a piece called Stride, which was about the struggle of her native people, Black people in Cuba. Beautiful piece. And she won the Pulitzer Prize for it that year. And the orchestra we were all so proud. And so it's taking risks, but now you see the change.
How do you provide advice for our listeners on building and maintaining connections as an imperative, and also how you think about music as a powerful connector in and of itself?
The arts in general, but especially for me, music, because it's wordless. We don't have to speak a language. Anybody, any place in the world can listen to a contemporary piece by Tanya Leon or Mozart and love it. So it's a particularly powerful form. Also, in that it's slightly ritualistic, in that you go in a group and attend it and you experience it together. You have to shut your iPhone off. I mean, it's a moment where it's quite an abstract but visceral experience at the same time. And that's why I used that phrase before. It expresses and keeps alive the flame of humanity. Our audiences, we are sold out right now. People are really feeling a need for this, for spiritual sustenance and intellectual sustenance. Gustavo Dudamel taught me something. And one of the things, it was wonderful. He was a great teacher for me, though he's many years younger. Many different lessons I learned from him. But one of the keys is music is a fundamental human right. Music is a fundamental human right. And if you think about that, because it's so easy to push the arts to the side and say, oh, I should be working in a refugee camp someplace to help people, or in the South and poor. But in fact, music is a community service.
It's wonderful. And thank you for your flaming humanity. I know as we wrap up our conversation, would you share with our listeners, and I know you've already touched on this, but what gives you hope? What is a message you'd like to share with our listeners, our learners, our leaders about elevating and inspiring the world around them?
It's difficult right now. It's difficult right now. But I think shutting out some of the incredible noise that's around us is very helpful. I'm spending less time on social media and watching, news reports, and focusing on areas or something that makes a difference to you, because we are essentially out of control. I mean, we don't control when we are born, we don't control when we die. And right now, we are in a period that may be of historic change. We don't know. So we have to find what makes our own lives. I mean, hopefully we'll find a way to return to our Constitution and democracy. And I hope the rest of the world does. But we have to find a way to live our lives in the meantime. And so that is pursuing, outside of your job and in your job, what your passion is, what you're feeling passionate about. And if that's reading a book or watching reruns of I Love Lucy, you go ahead, you do it. The other thing I have found, but I found this before, but it's reassuring right now, is when we talk about respect, part of respect is treating everybody the same. And I think that is so important, and enjoying those interactions, no matter if they're, I read an article recently that said, like, if you have a conversation with the man on the corner who you're buying your blueberries from, you take joy from that, and he takes some joy. And so I find engaging in those conversations and those smaller human connections very encouraging, very encouraging. And I'm not, of course, running the New York Philharmonic, and we have a wonderful new president, but when I was president, one of the things that I would always do is right before rehearsal, I just either be backstage or go out on the stage and just talk to people. And they would tell me about their son who was applying to Juilliard, or NYU, and their arm that hurt them. And it was great. It was great. It just felt very human. And I think we cannot ignore those little connections right now.
Wonderful advice. And I just want to say thank you, Deborah Borda, for this How conversation on moral leadership and elevating, inspiring. I think our listeners, all of us, feel elevated, inspired in your messaging and in the stories that you were willing to share. And thank you for being in common purpose and common cause, wave making with us with the How Institute for Society. And thank you for giving your flame of humanity in your special way.
Thanks so much. Great to see you.